Hi, okay, so let's get started on our next theory. Our next theory is standpoint theory, which we are actually going to add the word feminist standpoint theory on it to talk about the ways in which the original standpoint theory has been adapted to speak to gender. So, this is also a critical theory, and it is one that is used to understand privilege and again power, mostly this time from the perception or perspective rather of the marginalized, oppressed, or non-dominant group. So where a muted group really focused on the dominant group, standpoint theory really focuses on the non-dominant group. This is really a position then that is representative of any non-dominant group across any demographic. So whether it be a racial group, an LGBTQ status, a class citizen, a documented individual, or undocumented, we can think about it again across several different demographics. And here are the claims. The theory claims that an individual's perspective is shaped by their own social location. Okay, so take a look at this picture here on the slide of the elephant. Depending on where the individual is located, their actual position relative to the elephant, they see it for many different things. So the individual who can only see from the perspective of the ear believes that the elephant's ear is a fan, where the individual who is located next to the tusks is saying, oh no, it's a spear. The one next to the trunk, it's a snake. The one next to the leg, it's a tree. The one at the body of the elephant, that's all they can see. So to them, it's a wall, the object in front of them, and so on and so forth. So again, it's really taking a look at where your social location is, where you are standing, so to speak, relative to another individual, really shapes and influences your view of your reality. In that way, it goes back to our conversation about axiology, ontology, and epistemology by assuming that knowledge is socially constructed. In other words, that it is only together socially by putting all these pieces together that we get the full picture. I hope that makes sense. The last argument or claim to the theory is that marginalized groups, individuals from non-dominant groups, are typically socially situated or located in ways that makes it more possible for them to be aware of the power that exists given their limited sight. In other words, if you can only see the tail or the back end of something, typically those individuals are aware that that is where their social location is. For example, those who carry privilege might not be aware of their privilege as much as those who do not carry their privilege or who do not carry privilege are aware of those who do. I hope that makes sense. So perhaps you remember this viral video that went around a couple years back. It was where a young boy, a toddler, decided to paint his nails and went either to kindergarten or preschool, I can't remember, and was ridiculed terribly by his peers for painting his nails. Now, the boy basically went home and shared with his father what had happened and the bullying. And so the dad started a campaign that says, from the perspective of my son, he enjoys color. He enjoys art. He enjoys creativity. He enjoys, nail polish. And so the dad then painted his nails, started a campaign. Next thing you know, sports stars, celebrity, everybody were painting their nails in solidarity. That is one small application of this theory. Again, that depending on the non-dominant view, which is that the boy painted his nails, combats the social narrative that boys should not paint their nails or the status quo, right? So how can we discover moments of power and privilege? What is dominant? What is the status quo? By talking to members who live outside of it. That would really be a good application here. So here's some other sort of vocabulary words that we can tie in together with the theory. Hegemony, maybe you've heard this word before. Hegemony refers to basically political or cultural power, capital, even dominance over others, whereby a marginalized or non-dominant group, a subjugated group, acquiesces either through participation, behavior, communication norms to a dominant group. So, for example, we could take a look at masculinity or stereotypical hypermasculinity, right? In what ways are non-stereotypical, non-hypermasculine individuals subjugated or asked to acquiesce, participate in masculinity norms day to day, right? Here's another example. Popular kids at school deciding what's cool for others and sort of setting the tone, whether that be with fashion or language. Even wealthy lender nations influencing the leadership of debtor nations. Or privilege or priority given, for example, to white or Caucasian values over what is considered minority or non-dominant group values and perspectives when it comes to U.S. media. So one example I can think of is the value for male sports over female sports. But what else is privileged in the media as well? And take a moment to think about other ideas that really come to mind. So how do we apply feminist standpoint theory? Well, one application that is typically used in the literature is by looking at elections. So for this one, I'll go back to the 2016. And what we understand by taking a look at feminist standpoint theory is that we all, in the 2016 election, participated in some way, even by non-voting, voting, but not the same way, right? So whether or not you voted and whether or not you ascribe to a certain party preference, everybody went through the 2016 election in a very different way, though we all went through it. We could also make the argument for COVID 19. The nation went through and is going through the crisis together, but depending on which group you belong to, chances are you're experiencing this in very different ways. For example, those with healthcare versus those with no healthcare. Okay, so again, going back to our example with the election, what we would do to apply this theory would be to ask individuals from non-dominant parties or from non-dominant identities about their experience. So as an anti-establishment person, what might you argue about the 2016 election? From an independent perception or perspective, what might you argue? What might African Americans argue? What might women argue? What might LGBTQ members argue? What might migrant workers argue, or what might youth argue? And then we can get a fuller picture of how the 2016 election affected society as a whole by really understanding the various perspectives from different groups. Hegemony, then, going back to that idea, is the dominant group, or the winners in this case, right? The dominant group, the winners of the election, whoever they might be, tend to carry more political power because they won. And therefore, it is their values as a group that are validated over those quote-unquote minority or non-dominant perspectives. Now, you'll notice that the word minority is used a lot here, and that's not a word that I tend to use or choose to identify with in my pedagogy, but it is one that's used in the theory, so I'm using it in order to be consistent with the readings that you might have. We can also think back to different exercises that we've had, whether embedded in these PowerPoints or quick writes or in class, where we talked a little bit about the status quo, what the dominant ideology was, and how it was maintained. Who will it be challenged by, and how will it be challenged by? And again, that gets us closer to applying the feminine standpoint theory. The next theory that we go over, if there's time, will be critical race theory, but let us not skip too far ahead. That's it for now.